Today we'll continue to discuss this AB model, this model which is a generalization of the logistic equation in two directions. One is that it's spatially extended, and the other one is that it's discrete in terms of discrete particles, A and B. And as I mentioned, this is quite an old model, which people did realize that it captures some of the features of very different systems, from politics to economics and to social sciences and so on. And also they actually found some problems with applying this to certain systems which are not in equilibrium, and they said, well, maybe it applies, but not to all the systems. And in fact, we find that once we take into account the fact that the system is not just one single object, but it is made out of many discrete so to speak, microscopic systems, not only that we get much more realistic results about the systems in normal times, but even the abnormal times, they become natural, and they are completely explained or even predicted by this very simple model. So instead of obtaining either an increasing exponential or a decreasing exponential, as the naive system, when treated as a single entity, would predict, we have a situation in which the granularity of the A agents of the medium, even if it is microscopic, has macroscopic implications at the level of the emergent objects, emergent collective objects, because even though the fluctuations, the largest fluctuations in the number of A's in a certain region are very, very rare, they have very, very strong exponential effects, which promotes them to the level of macroscopic phenomena. And in fact, we have seen that this island, this mountains of bees, those herds of bees which are chasing the fluctuations in A, they behave like adaptive objects, as if they want to live, and as if they actually succeed to adapt themselves and to live much more than you would guess by just applying the mathematics to the entire systems as a whole. And I have shown in the past a movie. Here I'm showing only the beginning at the end. This is the map of Poland, number of enterprises per capita in the year of liberalization. And this is a few years after. And you see that there is a lot of structure which has appeared, which is exactly in this direction of having much large chunks of the economy going down, but the entire economy going up because of very singular points which are essentially taking the lead of the economy. So instead of, if you take a system whose naive parameters would say that, let's say, the number of enterprises per capita or the GDP would go down, in fact, at the beginning it goes down because most of the locations are going down, but the ones which are going up, which at the beginning are very small or localized, they take over. Moreover, instead of having the flat, saturated process which the naive logistic equation implies, one gets fluctuations and sometimes big fluctuations. And as I mentioned, the first example of it we found in the Polish economy, but after that we found in tens of other systems. And we have analyzed an even more simplified version of the AB model in which we asked what happens if just one A is changing positions, which corresponds to the conditions, random conditions being changed from time to time, and then asking what happens with the B population. And the B population in most of the system at the beginning goes down, except in the place where A is. But and it has a lot of fluctuations. This is a logarithmic scale, so these small fluctuations are actually factors of 2, 3, or 5. And what happens later, if the system is finite, eventually the entire system aligns to the growth rate of which is dictated by the island. And in fact, you see one gets this kind of profile after some time. And if one looks at the correlations of, let's say, the number of enterprises per capita in Poland, one sees indeed that this is the case, that at the beginning there is a kind of flat function, but after a few years you have this kind of mountains being formed around the points in which there are A accumulations. And we have identified in the previous lecture that the A's are in this case the education of people at those locations. So this is again this kind of graph which shows in years how this mountain grows exactly as predicted by the theory. And here there is this graph which again shows that indeed the this is again the number of enterprises per capita, how at the beginning most of the system, much more than half of the system, is going down, and only 16 companies, I'm sorry, 16 little regions out of 3,000 are taking the lead of the economy, grow by 400% in the first years, and they essentially dictate the course of the rest of the economy. Moreover, the system, as you remember, predicted that the growth rate at different points eventually equilibrates because of the diffusion of business throughout the country. But as you see, this is again a logarithmic scale. So even though the growth rate, it's equal, these slopes are all of them parallel to one another, there are very large factors between the absolute value of the GDP or the number of enterprises per capita in different regions. So this explains actually why the neoclassical economists, starting with Arrow and going through Durlov and the others, they were very intensively looking towards the convergence, kind of convergence of the economic life within an economy. The argument being that if in a certain place the manpower is cheaper, then the capital will go there, and then eventually the production will equilibrate. And we see that it is that by just allowing the capital from going from one place to another, only the growth rate is equilibrated. In order to get the GDP per capita equilibrated, you also have to allow the work power to go in different places and actually to adapt to the different places, to have a uniform education, a uniform way of communicating within the economy. It's much more difficult. So this convergence was never, absolute convergence was never found. And in fact, what we found instead is a very nice convergence, but of the growth rate. In fact, this is a simulation, and this is the data. As you see, they fit very well. And you see also this convergence of the growth rates. This is a distribution of the growth rates, how many little regions of these 3,000 regions in Poland have a certain growth rate. And you see that at the beginning is pretty wide, and it also peaked a little bit towards negative values, because at the beginning the economy was made out of all these guys which were losing and losing enterprises, and very few which were gaining enterprises. However, as time passed, this was in '89, the year of liberalization. Already in '91, first of all, you see that there is a shift to the right of zero. So it's towards many of the regions start having positive growth rate, and also there is a process of narrowing the range of growth rate, eventually getting to this very narrow distribution. And as you see, in a sense, it's also a little bit tilted. It looks a little bit like a power law in the sense that it has a longer tail here than here. Do you follow what these graphs are meaning? This is the same thing. With time in this direction and the same graphs, it's, you see even nicer that it starts with a rather wide distribution, and it ends up with a very narrow one. This same phenomenon happens not only in regions within the same country, but if you have a group of countries which, in which the capital is going very easily from one to another, then you see that their growth rates align. On a logarithmic scale, they are parallel lines. And there is this exception of Ireland, in which not only the capital could go freely to Ireland, but because Ireland was so close to Britain and speaking English already, then the very business, the very employment of people could be brought, tasks of people could be brought, let's say, from London to Dublin. And because of this, you have actually the real convergence of the GDP per capita, not only of the growth rate. So this is what I was saying before, that in order, but this is a very singular example. In most of the examples, by just freeing the capital, the barriers in language and in culture, and sometimes even in social barriers, are not allowing the convergence of the GDP per capita, but they do allow the alignment of the growth rate. This is a graph with countries which were not in contact with one another, in very remarkably China. And in fact, already at the time that we made this graph, we had data up to 2000 or so. It was clear that there is something bad going to happen if this lack of alignment continues. And indeed, some people associate the crisis in 2008 also to this disequilibrium of balance between China and the rest of the world. So here are other examples of alignment. I think that this is in Argentina, I think, or Brazil, in which there was this crisis here. But after that, again, the different sectors aligned themselves. And here it's a graph which is not on a logarithmic scale, in order to make the point that essentially this is the same graph with the different education regions in Poland, in which they, on the logarithmic graph, they were parallel. But when you make them not on a logarithmic graph, then in fact they are not parallel at all. The difference between them, in fact, grows exponentially. So there is a problem. The fact that the growth rate equilibrates in a country doesn't mean that the wealth within that country equilibrates. Quite contrary. It means almost automatically that, in fact, the different wealth in different regions, and these ones are classified according to the size of the location of the town, but it's very much correlated to the education. You see that the differences are in fact increasing exponentially. this is another way to see it. This was the distribution of enterprises per capita in different little regions. I forgot how they are called. But you see that they are spread. This is how many they are with one enterprise per 10,000 people, and how many they are with one enterprise per 1,000 people. And you see that basically this, the beginning, this was within one order of magnitude. This distribution, after the capitalist system started to develop there, you see that it now there are much larger differences between the number of. There are some regions which have almost one enterprise per 10 people here, which is. But there are still ones which are left like before, with 1 in 10,000. So the inequality is still there. And this graph is essentially the same, but it's even more telling. This is a year of liberalization, and this is number of enterprises per capita, and this is how many of the little regions have it. So you see that at the beginning there was a very uniform distribution. Everybody had more or less the same value. But as time passed, there were some of the regions, they really started to develop and having very large number of enterprises per capita, while most of the countries stayed with the same. So this is a kind of dynamics which the model predicts, this spread in the size of the economic activity at different locations, and this is what has been measured in this very detailed measurement in Poland. And I'm not showing here the geographical location, but you do remember that there was perfect correlation between the geographical location of the places where there was a high economic activity and the ones which had education. So, now I return to this other prediction, this crossing exponentials things, because if A or a group of A starts disappearing and another one starts appearing, or in real economy, if there is some law which puts in disadvantage the old economy, like it happened in Poland, most of the country was just subsidized, and in the moment that it stopped to be subsidized, it decayed, and only a few other, some guys here which were very small in number, they started to grow. So you have this kind of crossing exponentials, which the model predicts. And indeed, we found it in very many places. In a previous lecture, I showed something like 36 different realizations of it. Here, I'm just showing some additional ones which are somewhat interesting. There are these two dips in the Chinese economy which have to do with the crossing between industry and agriculture, which are probably related with the how do they call it? The Cultural Revolution, in which people were sent away from the cities to the agriculture, and then agriculture went up and the industry down. And at some stage, I don't know what happened, either Mao died or the Gang of Four were killed, and then people started to return to town, and you had the back crossing. But in both cases, you had some economic price which GDP have to pay. So it makes again the point that whenever you make a change whether it's good or bad, it doesn't make much of a difference at the beginning. If it is a real change, what used to be a dominant part of the economy is going to go down, and therefore, if you treat the entire system as a whole, you might get the wrong signal that something bad is happening, which is not necessarily so. This is another example in Portugal, in which the crossing was produced by the fact that until this point there was a rather austere dictature of Salazar and then Prime Minister Caetano, and after that there was the Carnation Revolution, and then the stress went from production to services, and you see this crossing, which also showed up in this crossing exponential shape in the GDP. After that, you see this alignment, which I emphasized before. This is again Portugal. It's a little bit more complicated. You have this minima of, this time is not of the GDP, but of the growth in GDP. And they are correlated with this crossing. The red, I think it's construction. So the construction goes down here, and it's taken while it was the dominant sector. And the dominant sector becomes hotels and restaurants. And then there is another crossing here, in fact, by somewhat back. The hotels and restaurants go down, and the other, and each of them are coming with their own dips. And this is a final very strong dip in the construction. So this I said, and there are these graphs, and of course the AB model is relatively complicated, and we used some complicated techniques, but this kind of fits, they can be made by simplifying the model and just declaring that the model is made out of two sectors, the old one and the new one. So in that case, one can express the entire system in terms of matrices. Do you know about matrices? Well, in this case, I will not insist upon it. I'm just mentioning that you can characterize the entire system in terms of four numbers. The growth rate of sector number one, of the old sector, which is going down now. The growth sector of the new sector, which is taking over, and the exchange of capital between them. And then when you apply this on the size, on this little vector, or a little couple of numbers, when you multiply this matrix to this vector, essentially it's like applying very many times this growth rate and this growth on the first sector, this growth rate on the second sector, and this mixing, which brings from the first sector to the second sector, and from the second sector to the first sector. And you keep doing that, and then what happens is that as long as you keep the matrix constant, then you have the new sector, which came from a very low value, growing, while the old sector is going down, and in total they are making this crossing exponential. And once there is some new reform, like in those three graphs of Bulgaria, Czech Republic and Romania, then you have other numbers in which the one which was going down is going now up, and the one which was going up is going down, and then you have this going down, this going up, and you get again this thing, and you have this kind of cusp in between them. So by very simple simplified models, one can get the behavior which is absolutely explaining the behavior of those economies in terms of just two sectors, the old one and the new one. And this is remarkably working because of this exponentiation, because once you have some exponential increase or exponential decrease, all the other perturbations are negligible compared with the exponentials. And this explains why such very strong simplifications of the more complicated AB model are still working very well. I would make again the point which I think I made before, that in general when people are speaking about these fluctuations over the years of the economies, they are speaking about cycles. And when they say cycles, they do like this. And as you see, the cycles don't look like this. The cycles look like this. The lower bound, it's smooth, but the upper bound, it's sharp. And indeed, this is what happens in very many cases. This is the case of Finland. So as long as nothing happens, you have very good fit by these double exponentials. And then you have this point in which there is a sharp cusp, but after that, again, you have a very good fit in terms of exponentials. And if you have very good time resolution, like we had for Britain, you can find for 20 years of data, you can find that in fact there are 1, 2, 3, 4 with 4 periods of separated by cusps, so you can fit the entire evolution of the economy, which is a very powerful tool. Especially it's powerful because if you take into account this this representation of the economy in terms of metrics, in terms of these 4 numbers, in which the first one, it is the growth rate of the new economy. This time it's, I put here the new economy, positive growth, and this is the growth rate of the or rather the decay rate of the old economy. And of course, a government cannot create wealth out of nothing. But in principle, you have control on taking from the product, let's say in terms of taxes, from one of these sectors and moving to the other sector. As you remember, those terms here are essentially taking from the growing one and giving to the one which is going down, or the opposite. So a government can, in principle, it cannot change very much the growth rate, but it can change this transfer of money between sectors. And then what happens is that different countries have taken different policies about that. You see, you can take a very small amount of transfer, essentially hands off, not doing anything. And in that case, you have immediately after the shock, once you apply this dynamics, the entire economy goes down very fast, but it reaches very fast the minimum, and then it recovers, and it recovers with a very high rate. While if you start taking from the growing one and giving to the one which is going down, let's say that there are people there which are not capable, or they don't have the time to change their trade, then they start making pressures on the government to have this old sectors being subsidized. Then you make the crisis less severe, but then the recovery is less spectacular. And in some cases, if you really take a lot from the productive one and giving to the one which is going down, then in fact the entire economy would go down. And this is the kind of situations which there are examples for this. For instance, in the case of Poland, after liberalization, this was an example in which the government adopted the policy of shock therapy, which means just not doing anything, letting the old sectors collapse. So the GDP per capita went down very fast, but then it recovered very fast. In the case of Japan, when there was a crisis, they were trying to support the economy, and they succeeded, but at the price that the crisis took much longer time, and the recovery wasn't so spectacular. And in the case of communist countries, they were taking systematically from the productive sectors and trying to prop sectors which were not justified economically. Maybe they were justified from the point of view of the Marxist theory. And then what happened is that eventually they got into a crisis from which they never recovered until the system collapsed. So you see that with these systems, and now I'm going to make a tour of other applications of this same model. Again, we have here a crossing between this blue sector, which on the map of Paris, there is this arrondissement, these quarters, and the red one, which are those ones. And of course, when people are speaking in general about the real estate in Paris during those years, they are speaking about this kind of a graph in which they are not differentiating very carefully between the different geographical locations within Paris. And all they had to say is to make some hypothesis about what could have justified the beginning of this very significant crisis in the real estate prices in Paris. And since in 1990 there was the Gulf War, they thought that maybe this was the reason. However, the data says something which is not completely against it, but it's much more nuanced. What happens is the following. These regions were inhabited mainly by the upper class related with industry, with old type of industry, Citroën and Renault and things like that, high engineers in those things. So this was the highest price locations here. And it might be that triggered by the problems with the oil during the first Gulf War, or with takeoff of the high-tech and startups, which happened more or less by the same time. What happens is that one had a systematic shift from having this region as being the dominating one in terms of the real estate to have the one which is associated more with high-tech and it's close to Sorbonne, high-tech and science-based industries. So this is a little movie of that. You see that I have two little movies. One is average price per square meter, and the other one is per apartment, which is not exactly the same thing. So you see that it starts with a dominant part here, and slowly it moves into that. I remind you that during all these times there is this big crisis taking place, and if you didn't pay attention, you might think everything is in crisis. But in fact, these regions, as you see, they are in fact recovering, and they live in crisis, only the ones which used to be at the beginning of the crisis, the dominant sector. So you see how the dominant sector moved towards and this is apartments prices. Again, one has this region dominating at the beginning, but during those years you have got stuck. You have this. So now you might, once you understand that the fluctuations in the entire system depend on the geographical distribution of wealth within the system, you can ask how this is controlled by the different factors. For instance, in the AB model, you remember there was a term which I was neglecting for a very long time, which was a competition between the bees when they were in a certain radius. Now, if you use this radius, essentially what happens is that if the radius is very small, then the islands are quite uniformly distributed. But if the radius is large, then the typical distance between this island, this herds of whales, is of the order of the radius itself, and therefore the islands, they are fewer islands, but with larger weight within the economy. So what you expect is that whenever if there are very many islands, then the fluctuations are small and fast, because each island is relatively small, then it can disappear and appear. But if you have a large competition radius, which would correspond to some kind of globalization of the capital, which can go and compete in very distant regions, then paradoxically, in place of having a spread of wealth, you have a strong localization of wealth, and then in time you have very large fluctuations of the entire number of bees, which is the entire wealth. So if you take a longer time, this was for a short time, a few snapshots for separated by relatively short time. But if you take longer time, then you start seeing that if you have very large competition radius, then you can have very large production and very large booms in the economy for some moments, but then you might have very severe crisis. While if you have local so these three graphs, this one is the one which I showed before. It shows what happens if you have globalization, very large competition radius. This green one is when you have the capital competing locally. Then you have much less production, but without having any crisis. And there is this intermediate situation in which the radius is moderate, and in which you have relatively high GDP, but but the crises are much more under control. And this has been substantiated in some of the data which we looked at. For instance, in Latvia, there was this entire region in which there was pretty much equal spread of the wealth, but there were no fluctuations. But for quite a while, the GDP per capita was much less than it was at the time of the liberalization. In Russia and Ukraine, one had moments of very high growth, but also fluctuation, very severe fluctuations. And Poland, again, the example which we studied, you see that immediately after liberalization, it went to a growth rate around 5%, and it stayed quite uniformly. Definitely above zero and relatively stable. So, so all these theoretical models, they do have all these theoretical models. They do have quite immediate and, in a sense, unexpected direct applications. I would now go to some applications. I gave until now applications in economics. Now there is one which is closer to where we live here. Here is Jerusalem, and here is the Dead Sea, and the Mediterranean is a little bit to the left. This is the region which we showed here. Now every year, the desert line moves by about 10-15 miles forth and back. In the time of towards the end of the summer, the border of the desert passes exactly through here. We are here. But in the towards the end of the winter, there is this entire region which is actually quite full of vegetation. Now, the question is, what is the mechanism? Of course, it's extremely crucial to understand what is the mechanism by which this desert force and back goes, because in this neighborhood of Jerusalem, we are lucky that it seems that it goes like this all the time. But someplace south around Beersheba, we have situations in which the desert is actually advancing and not returning. And the problem is to understand the dynamics of these patches of B, of these herds of B, in order to try to create the conditions that the desert will not win. And it turns out that indeed this AB model is very relevant, because the way this motion takes place is not the way I did it with my hand like this, you know, like uniformly this line going like this. It is rather by having a transition between very, very small bushes, which maybe they are surviving, going through some development of those autocatalytic patches, because they are autocatalytic, exactly like the B island in the AB model, and eventually going to a situation in which the amount of organic matter in the soil is saturated, which is the Mediterranean region. And in fact, we did cooperate with some geographs from Bar Ilan, which have these black points are places where they have measurement equipment in order to check this mechanism. So what we can learn in addition from this kind of things is how the survival of the bee population depends on the size of the system. Already now, for a very long while, the geographs did realize that if you have small patches of habitat, then in fact it's more difficult for the plant or the animals to live there. And then they hypothesized that maybe it's more difficult to live on the border of a region. That doesn't make much sense, because, for instance, if the border is water, then it's actually good for animals and plants to be next to the water. And the AB model actually says a completely different story. As you already realize, the places which are dominating the growth of the system are very singular, very rare. So if you have a small system, one little square, in fact, we know that the system is doomed to death. However, if you have a larger system, then there is a certain probability that even if the average of the A's is lower than what you would naively need in order to have the bees growing, you can still have patches of bees which are growing, and even if those patches are disappearing or moving from time to time, life itself, the bees themselves are surviving. So this is an example. Suppose that you have initially this kind of territory on which some animals can live, and this red point is some source of can you closer? And this is some source of life, either water or sun or other animals which they eat. So in the moment that this source disappears, then of course the patch is in trouble. And if this source reappears some other place, then the entire population, as we have seen, moves to that place. However, what happens is that if this source is moving randomly, at some stage it will go in that region, and if there is, let's say, a fence, you don't even have to steal territory from the habitat. It's enough that you are dividing it in places which cannot communicate to one another, that out of a sudden you are putting under question the survival of some species by just not allowing the entire territory to be available to them, but separating them into smaller pieces. So in fact, we have this kind of situation very close to here. There is this Emek Hayalot, the antelope valley. It's in the middle of Jerusalem. Until a couple of years ago, there were still antelopes there. And lately, I didn't see any of them, even though in principle it's still protected, but it's separated from other neighboring valleys, like the one which is used by the botanical garden of the Hebrew University. So you see that even though the source returned here, it's too late. This population is doomed. So, this model is offering ideas about why, for instance, having a smaller territory available, or even the same territory but not as a free roaming place, it's in fact very dangerous for the vegetation and for the animals in that region. Another application in which the AB model is applied in both directions, made for the HIV infection. The HIV infection is by now understood very well. This article is more than 10 years old. But the initial puzzle was the following, that the acute phase was just like a normal malady of a few weeks. And in fact, it was resolved by the immune system of the organism pretty quickly. And after that, there was a time in which there were new attacks by new strains of virus, which, however, the organism was repressing them very easily, like it would do with a normal with a normal flu or something like that. It was only after years that the thing got out of control. So the model which we came up with, these are the data from the model, and this is a stylized description which the professionals, doctors, have given at the time. So the mechanism is it's a little bit paradoxical, and we called it winning the war while losing all the battles. This is actually initially I thought about the title "Losing the War and Winning of the Battles," but it's more pessimistic. But this is from the point of view of the virus, so it's optimistic, but from the point of view of the virus. So let me explain what happens. This I already explained, that there is the initial invasion, which these are the viruses, and they are immediately suppressed by the reaction of the organism. And then there is a slow region with some fluctuations, and only towards the end, the immune system cells are collapsing, and the virus population is going up. So, the way the immune system works, it's astonishingly similar to the AB model. Do you know about how the immune system works? Do you care? No. Maybe I will pass very quickly about this. Essentially, if you imagine that this is a shape space, that each antigen, each virus has a certain typical shape. and the organism doesn't know that shape. So what the organism does, it generates all the time arbitrary shapes. Whenever it generates a shape which fits the invader, then it recognizes it. The cell says, I found something. And this something, it doesn't look like anything of our own cells. Because those cells of the organism, of the immune system, are made such that they don't fit any of the organism. So if they fit to something, that for sure it's an enemy. So I imagine that each point on this line, it's a shape. And the B's are the B cells, actually called the B cells. Of the immune system. So they are generated, and if they don't find anybody which has this shape or this complementary shape, then they die. They are programmed to die after a week or two. They die very graciously, with no waste. They return all the energy and the proteins to the organism. So this is a healthy organism. There are no attackers, antigens, and the immune system is just patrolling the shape space. And at some stage, suppose there is an infection. This is symbolized by the infection. This is the shape. This point here represents the shape of the invasion. And the organism keeps generating randomly. The organism doesn't have any way to know in advance what is the shape, until at some stage, because there are more and more virons, particles of virus, then the probability that it will be detected increases. In fact, this one, you see, had the right shape, but it didn't find anybody because it was still too diluted. It existed there for 2 weeks. It looked for somebody, but the organism is pretty big, and it didn't find. But after some time, now it will find. Ah, okay, now it found. Maybe it found from the. So now the cells of the organism, now that they found that somebody is fitting them, they start multiplying, and moreover start starting to destroy those. At the beginning, they are not so efficient because they are very few. But they are multiplying very fast, exponentially, like in the AB model. Essentially, the virus acts like the A for the B cells. You'll see that also the B cells are acting as an A for the virus too, because the virus lives on the B cells. But in the meantime, there is this growth in the number of B cells. And it starts, at some stage it will start really to, the rate at which they destroy the virons would be faster than the rate at which the virons are multiplying. So these multiplications of the virons now, it's, as we say in Hebrew, on borrowed time. What is, however, terribly important, much more important than these billions of virons here, there is this. This is a mutation. Remember, when a bee goes from one place to another, it's a mutation. The shape has changed a little bit. Therefore, this is dangerous because this was not this is not detected yet by the organism. So this one is going down. The virus is going down. These cells are still going up. Not for long, because if once they will destroy the virus with this particular shape, there is no reason for them to. They don't meet anymore like this, and they kill themselves. But in the meantime, these ones are growing. And they are growing without being observed by anybody. Nobody knows about them. And now there is another mutation here. So actually the virus, this retroviruses, they are very sloppy. This is their strength. They don't copy correctly their RNA, and because of this, there are these mutations which are very fast compared with. So here already the initial invasion has been liquidated. the organism has won a battle. And now it's going to win also those battles. You see, this was this was the example in which it was too little to be detected, but it will be detected in a while. Okay, this one is detected. The organism starts reacting. In this moment, this particular population is doomed. At some stage, it will be eliminated. But unfortunately, by the same time, there is now this one which wasn't detected, and this one which was just produced by a mutation. And this one is, in fact, so little of them that even if the shape complementary with them goes around, finding them, it's not going to be very easy. On top of this, they have some tricks of hiding in different places. But so what happens is that the organism is winning a lot of battles, essentially most of the battles for a very long time. But for each battle that it's winning, there is some other mutation which appears. So, and each of the mutations by themselves are not very dangerous. It's just like another flu. It's not a big deal for organisms, but having at some stage having a few hundred flus is not very good for good organism, and then it dies. So this is how, in our imagination, looks the landscape of shapes towards the end, in which the organism cannot find all of them, and even if it would find, it would be very difficult to take care of them, all of them, at the same time. So that was one application, and some of the students which were involved in this are now professors, which are actually making experiments which are in fact using some of those understandings. Now, there is another direction in which this AB model and its effects is producing quite unexpected results. Suppose that in addition to the A and the B, I introduced some new entities, the Cs. These are predators. Like the Bs are more or less like cows. They are eating the As, or not eating, not even that. They are like plants, just sitting in the sun and taking advantage of the sun. The As don't even get consumed, like the sun doesn't get consumed. Not at our scales. But now there are the Cs. The Cs are eating the bees, and if they don't eat bees, then die with some rate. If they eat a bee, then they multiply. Now, there is in one of the previous lectures, I was commenting that the Darwin's mechanism of selection, it's of course valuable, but when it comes to short-range adaptation, there is this other mechanism in which the organisms are automatically selecting the place where they are born, and therefore they are surviving better. Here we are finding another paradox touching a little bit the Darwinian paradigm. Because naively speaking, when people speak about the Darwinian paradigm, but most of the people, I wouldn't say that all of the specialists, the image is that by having this kind of iterative selection, one gets to the most efficient individuals. It's even said the survival of the fittest. I'm going to show here that if you have populations which are made out of the fittest individuals, it's very bad for the population. Very, very bad for the population. It's better for the population to have, it's better for the bee population to have not too efficient bees, like not to the kind of lambda that would allow them to fill the entire system. It's better for them to live in islands, like we found. And it's better for the seas not to eat too fast, because then they will not be able to. So even though for each of the individual it's better, let's say, to eat and to multiply it as fast as they can, for the species, it's not good. There is a very clear contradiction between the good of the individual and the good of the species. And since the selection is at the level of the individual, then this might put very serious problems to the species. In economics, this is called the tragedy of the commons. It's about, it first was formulated in the context in which, let's say, there is a village and they have in common some pasture. And now everybody wants to maximize his own advantage, so he sends his cows to the pasture as fast as possible before the others eat it completely. So in the end, the grass is eaten completely, and it doesn't grow anymore, and everybody loses. But the mathematicians can prove that this is unavoidable. We have some other models, which probably I will not get in this course to describe, in which the conclusion is slightly different. But let's now analyze this ABC model. So we have the A and the B exactly like we have before, in which even though naively the bees don't have a right to exist, they do exist, and they do exist in this kind of isolated island. And now I'm sending some predator which is succeeding. If he eats bees, then it multiplies. Now, this kind of system in which A is taken uniform, and you just have these reactions, C disappearing and C multiplying on the bees, and the bees multiplying, but in a uniform way, not without A. This was studied long ago, again by Lotka, which we spoke about him before. He was also instrumental in the logistic equation. But him and Volterra, they wrote also the equations for this kind of system, the paradigm of a prey-predator system. This is, again, some of the things which I am teaching are somewhat my own preferred subjects. But some of the things are really very, very general, very universally known. And one of them is this prey-predator system, which when you write in terms of differential equations, when you write in terms of one single, so to speak, the system is one single entity, then essentially what happens, if you write, if you can characterize the evolution of the system in the following way. If you write the number of bees on this axis and the number of Cs on this axis, then at each moment there will be a point on this map would say how many bees and how many Cs there are. Moreover, if you follow it in time, then there will be some trajectory. What happens with the number of bees and the number of Cs? Any curve in this space describes what happens at each time. So it was found mathematically that if you treat the system like a single entity with B and C and write some equations about it, then essentially the trajectories look like this. They are closed trajectories, so essentially the bees are going up and down smoothly, and the Cs are following them, not at the same, not together, but with some delay between them. Moreover, because, however, once you take that the B's and the C's are discrete, are not continuous, if this distance here is less than 1, then of course you can have that. There cannot be less than one rabbit, and then the entire thing can collapse. So people started to realize sometime after those people wrote the equations that when you deal with discrete systems, and especially if you let them spread in space also, you take into account space, then there are corrections to it. but they didn't take into account still the corrections which are related with the bee islands, which is what I'm going to discuss now. So what they did was essentially, this is just one system in which there is one A at some place fixed, and then the B's and the C's are having this trajectory. When you draw them separately, then you see that each of them are fluctuating. Okay. So this is not a big deal. This is another regime. The A is sitting in a corner, but I'm using the convention in this kind of simulations is that you have periodic boundary conditions. So this point is a neighbor of this point, and this is why you see that the populations are in these four corners. Actually, they are each of them a little area, and one of them is representing the B's, and one of them is representing the C's. And again, this is not a very complicated behavior. This is some other behavior in which there is some amortization. But the effect which, to tell you the truth, we first thought about it, and then we made the simulations and also the analytical work, was saying the following. Wait a minute, the bees are living in islands. If I put a predator which is very efficient, he will eat the island where he was born, and all the other islands will survive. So we have a paradox here, because if the predator is very efficient, okay, so this is the predator, okay? I started with one infected guy. And these are two bee islands. They are separated as we found them. And now the sea is eating the bees and grow and multiplying. So this is already, there are no bees, and therefore there are also no Cs here. So this is white. These are the Cs which are eating the bees. These are bees which were not yet contaminated with Cs. So what can happen is that this island is being eaten, but this island is left alone. And unless they just meet 1 second before that one is completely eaten, and in that case, that one will be eaten too. So we have here a balance between how fast C is eating, and if they are too efficient, then it's not good for them. And also for the bees, it's not good, because if the bees are efficient, then the islands are big and meeting one another a lot. And then in the entire bee population will lose. If they are not so efficient, they are a little bit stupid, you know, not really multiplying very efficiently, then you have islands which are pretty rare, and they are not meeting one another, and they will live happily ever after. So this is the kind of mechanism that we were looking for, and these are some movies. These are, I'm starting with A and B's, and I let the 3 islands of B develop, and only after that I will put the C's. Now this is the C, and these are the 3 islands of B. Already the C has destroyed this island, which was, do you want to see it again, or you remember? Let me. So again, these are the 3 islands of B. They are around some A's. The A's, you cannot see them because they are too small. But they are here in this particular place. And now there was an attack. This island was completely destroyed. But now he ate all the islands, so the C's are disappearing too. However, one of the C's is going to get into this island. And then the sea population is growing again, and but now it's dying, and that's it. The seas are doomed, extinct, and the bees are. This is again ABC. There was the island of B, which you saw on both sides because of the periodic boundary conditions. Here are the seas. They ate all of the bees here. Now the bees are running away in some place where they hope that the seas will not find them. But you will see that they find them. Now, They find them and they start eating them. But now the bees found some other place where they could develop until they are going to be found again. Here, they are found again. And actually now they are attacked from two sides, and they are going to die. So, so the question, no. Somewhat they, no, now they are dying. Okay. And of course the seas, no. But I remember that they were dying at some place. Yeah, eventually both die. In fact, I myself didn't remember well, and because of this I wrote on them what is going on. Let's see to the end, because there are still some little bee points which are still existing. In principle, they could. No. I don't know. In any case, the seas are dying too, of course. This is another movie. Again, A, B, and C. This is the attack of the seas in two islands. Here, these guys killed this. This one is killed. This one is killed now. But eventually, they left. The seas have left a lot of territory eaten here. And because of this, they are dying, even though in principle the bees are still there. If the seas weren't too efficient, they could have lived to this very day. And now these are two parallel runs, which are with different outcomes, even though the system was very, very similar. This one, I think, is won by the bees, and this one is won by the seas.
How does the sea move over from one island to another?
What do you say?
How does the sea move over?
The sea, they have, like the bees and like the ants, they have a certain probability of jumping. Now, but they have also a probability of dying. So if they have to make, let's say, 7 jumps in order to get to the next island, they might be able to do that. But if they have to make 20 jumps, by that time they are dead.
And bees can't jump?
The bees jump too. Everybody jumps.
So why doesn't, like before there were like 2 pictures, and one of them it was an island without seas, and one of them was an island with seas?
Because they were, they are, okay, so these questions I'm answering now because I have now even more detailed analysis of what is going on now. I'm going to make the analysis in terms of pictures, but we also made them in terms of a lot of formulas. But I'm going to spare you the mathematics, but you will still see the intuition behind okay, this is when the bees are dying, but I don't want to, I want to get already, okay. So there are a few little, these are screenshots, okay, so that I can explain better. I start with 2-dimensional, like the movies, but at some stage we'll get even to a 1-dimensional system so that you can understand even better what are the mechanisms which can lead to the survival of the bees. So here you see at time 20, the little point in the middle, they are supposed to be red, but I don't know if you see them as red, they are the A's. The green stuff, it's the bees, and the blue guys are the C's. So there is some infection here, and it's disastrous, as you see. It kills almost the entire bee population. And at some stage, it really only very, very few islands, peripheral bee islands, are existing. However, the C's are dying too, because in the places where they were, there is no bees left. So you see, in principle, there could have been a C which would get here and start eating. But this is depends on how fast they are eating, how fast they are moving, how fast they are dying. So in this particular case, this C's here did not succeed to get to here. Maybe they were unlucky. All of them went in the other direction. The point is that at this point there are no seas left, and then the bee population starts recovering itself, and essentially it gets as dense as at the beginning, in spite of the fact that there was such a disastrous epidemics.
But this was contingent on all the seas dying?
Yeah, if the seas wouldn't have died, that's the entire thing which we are following now. Who is winning? Is C succeeding to destroy all the bees, or are the seas somewhat disappearing before succeeding to invade all the bees? Now, if the entire area here would be green, then we know what is the answer. The seas will eat everybody. The fact that the bees are organized in islands and the islands are separated from one another, which means that we are in the regime in which naively the bees don't have even the right to exist, because we know that these islands appear because there is this anomalous resilience of the bees, even in situations in which the naive parameters would say when you treat the entire system as an entire whole, you get completely different results. And the point is that for a very long while, after Locke and Volterra, the system was treated like an entire system. And even after people started to treat it spatially, they didn't address this effect which I'm speaking now. Here is another movie, but you see here it's even a more strange situation. In the previous situation, the seas just didn't arrive to some of the islands. We call this phenomenon the Ebola phenomenon. Ebola, it's a malady typically in Africa. When it gets into a village, it essentially destroys in a matter of days the entire population. But exactly because of that, it doesn't have the capability to spread. So this is an extreme situation. This were an extreme situation in which the mechanism which you saw before, in which an island which is infected is destroyed, maybe some other island, but eventually some islands are just not reached by the infection. What happens here, it's quite different. We call this effect, initially we called it the Aeneas effect, then we called it the Agag effect, and now we call it the diaspora effect. Now, do you remember what happened with Aeneas? Aeneas was a prince of Troia, which was the only one left essentially alive. So he went and eventually his descendants established Rome. So this is it. And but then we remember that in the Bible we have another example of Agag, the king of the Amalekites, I think, which the prophet Shmuel told Shaul that he must kill him, otherwise he will have problems from now to eternity with him. But he spared him, and then he had a lot of descendants which made problems. And you can also call a diaspora thing, because essentially what happens is that all the bee islands are destroyed. But still, because of the discreteness of the bees, there are some individual bees which are surviving, and with a little bit of luck, they meet an A. You see, there is an A, a little bit A there. So, this has the opportunity to restore the population, and eventually gets exactly to the same situation like before the disaster. So this is the two effects. This one was in which the entire islands were spared. And this one is when just the individuals were spared. And now, but still, these pictures which I'm showing you are still at the level of islands. Now, And this one, again, is the same thing. The green wins. Somewhat, my student which made the picture probably was of the Green Party. So he made them win. But let's now go to another system, such that you can see in microscopically what's going on. This time the system is one-dimensional. This is time. It's not anymore the space. This is time, and this is space. And A are red. But since the B's are green, then you see the A's as yellow. You remember when we were in the kindergarten? So the yellow here is the same with the red here. So let's see what happens. The colors are not very successful, and because of this, you might not see. Okay. So what happens is the following: there is this population of bees which are living on the existence of the A's, and there is this infection by C's here. So the C's start eating around here, and they essentially by here. They have destroyed basically almost the entire bee population. However, there is yes, you cannot see, but there is a very small amount of bees which are surviving here, and one of them is hitting here and starts multiplying, and it restores this island. So this is of the Aeneas type. It's just one single guy is restoring the entire population. And these runs were made at the very boundaries between the different the different phases. You see, what we are usually interested in when we look as physicists to this, it's the phases of the system. So, and the phase transitions, these dramatic changes from one situation to another. Why are we looking for dramatic things, changes between one situation and another? First of all, of course, naturally, we are looking for dramatic things, something to keep us interested. But it's also something else. These kind of models are very simplified models. If they just give you some kind of smooth prediction about what is going on, then every little correction to it will change your prediction. But if you have this kind of very dramatic changes, you say, look, I have an entire phase in which the B's are winning, and there is another phase in which the C's are winning, and I know exactly how to compute the boundary between these phases. Then even if somebody says, yeah, but you know, you didn't take into account that there are females and males, and that there is also geographic features. So, and you say, yeah, that's true, but this dramatic effect is so dramatic that even if you put some the corrections to it, I'm still going to get that. And this is what happens, hopefully, many times. And in fact, let me I will show you more of these little movies, but I'm going before I want to show you these phase transitions. If you don't take into account the spatial and the discrete characteristics of the A, B's, and C's, then essentially you have like this. You have the region. If you have on this axis the prey efficiency and on this axis the predator efficiency, then what you get is the following, that in all this region you have coexistence, this kind of, you remember this periodic ups and downs of the B's and the C's. In this region there is only the B's are surviving because the C's are so inefficient and they just cannot do anything. They you know, like you put them food in front of them and they cannot eat. And here also there is a region in which the prey is very inefficient and therefore they die. But except for that, there is this region of coexistence. This is if you don't take into account the effects which we took into account. But if you do take into account the effects, then you can, I'm not going to do that. You can take into account separately the discreteness of the A's and the B's, putting them all of them in one place, but taking into account that these are discrete, that they are individual A's and B's. Or you can take a spatial distribution and but continuous. But if you and then you get some corrections to the naive thing. But when you take into account both the fact that the A's and the B's can move around and the C's now, and that they are discrete, then you get a very, very interesting situation. Because look what happens. This is the prey efficient in this direction. And of course, if it is terribly efficient, then it's black. It's extinction. But if it is too efficient and the predator is also very efficient, this is the efficiency of the predator, look what happens. The bees are destroyed. And we know now. We know, because the bees are now not in islands. They are just one thing. The entire population goes away. On the other hand, if the bees are not so efficient and the Cs are very efficient, then look what happens. This is a survivor. Survival means that the Cs are disappearing and the bees are surviving. So it's better for the bees not to be so efficient. If they are too efficient, then they die. If they are not that efficient, then they survive. And for the Cs, it's the same thing. This is the only region in which the Cs are existing. If they have moderate level of efficiency. If they are too efficient, then they don't survive. They don't survive either. And they don't survive not because they destroy the entire bee population. Because here the bee population survives. Just that the Cs don't know how to exploit it optimally. So now let me show more movies of how this goes. All of them in one dimension. So okay, so this one we have seen. You cannot see on the screen, but there is here an entire region of pale green, which one of them it's reaching the A. This one it's almost with the same parameters, but again you cannot see. There is one which was about to reach the A, but just died in his way, because the student just made a very fine change in parameters, like the speed of death, which allowed to find this very dramatic boundary between the entire bee population surviving or the entire bee population disappearing. These two, I hope you realize that these two things are almost identical. They differ by just one single guy which was spared. Agag, I guess. This one, it's another, it's also very close to the previous parameters, except that here the Cs just didn't get to the third island. There were 3 islands around the A's, and in one of the islands, so this is the Ebola effect. You cannot see, but the density of actually, you can see that this is almost black here. The density of bees is very low. It cannot sustain the Cs. So the Cs destroy this region, but they cannot destroy. They cannot get to that region with these particular parameters. And here it's again very small effect. There is this region of bees, and one of them, it's periodic boundary conditions. So one of them, it goes like this, and then it gets here. You cannot see it, and it starts the regeneration of the bee population. So these are the three alternatives which are obtained by very, very small changes in the parameters. This is what we call phase transitions. Very small changes in the parameters can lead you to complete extinction of everybody, to regeneration of the bees by the diaspora effect, or to the regeneration of the bees by the Ebola effect. And here it's another boundary between the region in which the seas are surviving and the seas are not surviving. You see, the seas are so efficient that once you get here, they kill all the bees in their immediate region, and then they die themselves, and then the bees regenerate. And this is what happens here too. There is a very strong epidemics, but very localized. You see, there is these seas which are coming here and infecting and making a big splash here. Here they don't make a big splash because the density of bees is very low. But in this, these are differing by very little values of the parameters, and you see that in this case the seas are surviving. They while here not. So the way I'm describing here, it looks like just anecdotes in which sometimes the seas are surviving and sometimes they are not. But as I said, once you realize what is the mechanism, it is not too difficult to make analytical estimations of what is going on and see what are the parameters for which the seas are surviving and what not. Here you see that there is this population of sea which is surviving quite a lot, and from time to time it's infecting this island here, and it has periodic epidemics here. And here it succeeds to keep going like this. Here actually it destroys the entire thing, and the seas disappear, and the bees are recovering. And here again there is some trajectory which is difficult to see, but it regenerates. Okay, so we are finished with AB model and its different reincarnations. And next time we'll discuss some other forms of autocatalytic feedback loops, which are exponentiating to macroscopic level microscopic events. So again, getting the complex macroscopic collective behavior out of very simple microscopic interactions.